First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this month's webinar titled Winter Air. I'm Sabrina Idris, the Centre for Safe Air Postdoctoral Research Fellow, and I'll be chairing today's webinar. As temperatures drop, many households turn to wood heaters and indoor gas appliances for warmth. This webinar will explore how wood heater smoke and indoor gas combustion contribute to poor air quality, exacerbating respiratory conditions, cardiovascular disease, and other health issues, especially among vulnerable populations. It will feature presentations from Dr. Amanda Wheeler and Dr. Ben Ewald. Each speaker will present for 20 minutes, followed by a Q&A after all presentations have ended. So please drop your questions in the Q&A section. Our first speaker is Dr. Amanda Wheeler, who is a senior research scientist at CSIRO's Environment Unit and Chief Investigator at the Centre for Safe Air. She has published over 110 peer-reviewed papers on air pollution and health. After completing her PhD in environmental health at Middlesex University, Amanda held a research fellowship at Harvard studying cardiovascular effects of particulate matter, followed by a research role at Health Canada. She has contributed to studies on children's exposures during the Hazelwood coal mine fire, co-developed the Air Rater app, and evaluated strategies to reduce biomass smoke exposure. At the Australian Catholic University, she worked with EPA Victoria on indoor air quality during planned burns and with the Department of Transport on cleaner school commuting routes. Amanda co-leads the Air Quality Impact Priority under the National Environmental Science Programme, Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub. Over to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thanks to the Centre for Safe Air for hosting today's webinar. I am a very last minute step in for Fay, who is unfortunately unwell. So I apologise if it's a little bit scattered today, but I hope I cover majority of what she was hoping to share with you. So I just share my screen. Is that okay?
Yep, that looks good. Thanks.
Okay. So as Sabrina mentioned, this is around winter air, and so I'm obviously presenting on behalf of Fay. I thought I'd just give some context around what the wood heater problem is and refer to some of the health impact assessment results and the interactive tool that's been developed through the centre and through our colleague Nico Borchas, and go and talk a little bit about the wood heater workshop report findings that we conducted through the Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub, and also some of the wood heater change out and education campaigns that have resulted from that body of work. Some of you may be here today because you saw the article on the ABC around wood heater pollution and health and deaths, and so I've included the link here if you haven't. So I thought I'd start with some context and sort of try and build a picture around the problems in Australia related to wood heaters. We know that wood smoke is a major source of air pollution, and we've seen that from both Sydney and Melbourne, where nearly half of the population weighted exposures to particulate air pollution is from wood heaters, despite only around 5% of the households having wood heaters. And so it's a major source of air pollution, and it outweighs a lot of the other emission sources that we know of around particulate matter. So it is a major problem. In terms of what health impacts, we know those are large. There's been recent analyses completed to sort of demonstrate the number of deaths related to exposure to wood heater smoke, and we also know that that translates into some high economic costs as well. We often look at the relative impacts of air pollution. We know that there's a pyramid of health. A lot of people are exposed, but only very few people actually die as a result of exposure, but we do have a lot of physiological impacts and symptoms. We're in the thousands of people who would report symptoms, down to hundreds when we think about who would have to go and see a doctor, and then a progressively smaller amount who would be admitted to hospital or who would die. So it is a significant challenge globally and in particular in Australia. The other aspect that's problematic with wood heaters is that we have, sorry, not changing screen. Sorry, just having trouble. There we go. Is that the current standards for wood heaters is not fit for purpose, and it's also not enforced. And so there's a lot of emissions that we can be better managed, and I think that that's an aspect of the work that Fay has been working on, and I'll talk a little bit towards the end of this presentation around that work. So in terms of what's achievable, obviously Dr. Borchers has published around the mortality burden attributable to wood heater smoke in Australia, and I think he presented last year, I believe. So do go back through the Centre for Safe Air webinars and take a look at that presentation. And it was an important contribution, I think, to our understanding of the health effects related to wood heater emissions. So I do recommend having a read. Some of the estimated mortality burdens that he has also previously worked on demonstrate that the number of deaths per state and territory, and this work has been updated more recently, where he's been looking at the times of exposure throughout the year and also the amount of exposure per state and territory. So you can see, obviously, there's a much higher use of wood heaters during the winter time, and that's across all states and territories. And so most people, it was estimated that around 1.35 million households in Australia would use firewood as their main source of heating. What that translates to, when you look at the a geographically spatial area, is that there are hotspots basically of wood heater emissions, and so that has really sort of driven a lot of the research activities that have resulted from the NESP score research. And so another component that is probably useful for people to access is the data visualization tool. And so that actually you can put in your location and you can show, what is the mortality estimates related to wood heater smoke and where you're located. So I think has been covered previously. So I think that I'll park that for the time being, but if you have questions, I'm sure we can answer them at the end. In terms of the work that was done for the NESP score, the Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub, we started back in December 22 and held an online wood heater smoke workshop. And that was really just an opportunity to sort of understand what the problems were, connecting with a whole range of stakeholders and organisations to understand what the problems were, what solutions they had trialled, what information was already in that space. And so I think that it was well attended, had over 140 participants from 96 organisations across Australia. And it was really, I think, a great chance for us to leverage a lot of the work that was taking place, but also to build on everybody's knowledge as well. There were, sorry about the small font on this one, but we had a number of different themes for discussion, because there's a lot of assumptions around the fact that behaviour change will manage this problem, and as years have gone by, we've been finding that hasn't really worked. And so, what else could we consider doing? A lot of the concerns were that there's nothing really legislative that can be used to enable enforcement. And so, I think this is where some of the work that Fay has been engaged in around the developing the standard for the wood heaters will help. And we also needed to sort of understand what interventions were feasible and look at the efficacy of them, both in terms of monetary costs and benefits. So in terms of the workshop, we were able to establish connections in some of the locations where we've seen that the wood heater emissions are a problem, and that those include Mount Barker, Armidale, Launceston, Canberra and Snug. And so I'll talk now a little bit around the actual projects themselves. So in Mount Barker, we started a project called Let's Talk About Smoke, and it was around co-designing a wood heater intervention for Mount Barker. And that looked like a number of different workshops. We also had focus groups and worked closely with Council and the South Australia EPA to sort of map out different options, what the costs and the benefits of various ways to deliver wood heater behaviour change out programs would be, and piloted a communication intervention late last winter, and are currently in the process of sharing findings. So there were wood heater owner workshops, just to try and prototype some solutions and understand the rationale for using wood heaters, and sort of focus groups, piloted a selected strategy, and then went back to the wood heater owners as well. So this work is just pending. It's part of the PhD for Juliet, and she'll be hopefully making the information available soon. So the pilot was called the Chirpy Chimney campaign. So you can see that here that you have a happy and a sad chimney, and just to try and simplify that, people need to burn only dry and seasoned wood, storing the wood in a dry, well-ventilated area, and never use gasoline, kerosene, charcoal starters or a propane torch, and never overfill the heater with wood or leave it on a low setting overnight when you go out. And so this was to try and educate people on the best way to use their wood heaters, and explain that if you can see smoke, it actually is a harmful pollutant. So hopefully in the near future, Juliet will be in a position to share the results of trialling that methodology. The other project was called Making the Switch, so trialling a wood heater replacement scheme in Armidale, New South Wales. And so this was funded through Asthma Australia, working with Armidale Council. So this was to replace wood heaters. Each home was given a $3,000 budget plus a free energy audit. And so we're currently piloting the scheme in 25 homes. And they're being incentivized to remove their wood heaters and replace them with a reverse cycle air conditioner. There's lots of commentary from wood heater users around the fact that that it keeps their homes very warm. It's hard to do that with another form of heating, and so we wanted to track home temperatures and energy bills pre the intervention and then post, so that we can actually evaluate that concern. And so the goal is that we'll share the findings with more broadly once we've gone through that process. So, oh goodness, sorry, very small text. There's, as I said, there's a number of choices that people can make and can get involved in the project. And we already know that participants are already contemplating switching, so that's been helpful to have the $3,000 to actually push them into doing it. I think a lot of people are concerned that there's, cost, but there's also, the hassle of doing the change out. So we're just interested to see how people respond to that. So at the moment, the pre-installation interviews are scheduled for September. That we've been to the homes already and installed temperature sensors, and had a pre-interview with them, and then the installation will happen in spring, so that the homes will have the opportunity to make use of the air conditioning during the summer, and then we'll go back and do interviews in June and November in 2026. So work in progress, but a lot of enthusiasm and interest. We had over 70 homes expressing interest, and have selected 25. In Snug, we have done another type of behaviour change, and so there's air quality monitors located around Snug, and the local community weren't advised that this was going to be taking place, but they started to light up a tree by the local primary school, and if it was red, you can see that it was related to poor air quality, and when it's lit up in green, it means that the air quality is good. And so they went back to the community and put up information about why the tree was changing colours, and we're going to be tracking the air quality to see whether that has any impact on when people burn wood, or whether it prevents them or makes them rethink what they're doing when the air quality is poor in the local area. In terms of other research activities that are taking place, the University of Canberra are conducting a wood heater and health study, and that's trialling the use of HEPA cleaners in homes. So they've selected 20 homes with and without wood heaters. That also has an asthmatic occupant. They'll be testing the asthmatic residents' lung health, and they'll also be monitoring indoor and outdoor air quality, just to see whether the reduction that's provided by HEPA cleaners around indoor air quality actually is beneficial to health. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the University of Tasmania have been doing a lot of wood heater testing to sort of evaluate a practical methodology to test for wood heater emissions, and improve the technology and reduce the emissions resulting from wood heaters, with the goal that this will support changes to the Australian standards. So hopefully I haven't gone over time too much, but just wanted to acknowledge Fay's contribution, but also Sharon and Juliet for support with all of the research activities, and help getting the slides together this morning. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amanda, especially for doing this the very last minute, and for stepping in, and for giving an overview on wood heater work across Australia. It's all very interesting. Our next speaker is Dr. Ben Ewald. Ben is a general practitioner in Newcastle, has a PhD in epidemiology, and taught public health topics at the University of Newcastle for many years. He is the convener of the AIR Special Interest Group for Doctors for the Environment Australia, and is engaged in health advocacy on issues of air pollution from coal, gas, and transport sources. He has published more than 40 papers in peer-reviewed journals. His main interest is applying the methods of epidemiology to the patient level and policy level decisions that affect health. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Sabrina. So I'll make the slides share. Is that sharing properly?
It's not in full view yet, so I think you might have to click on that. Yeah,
Right.
that is good.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Sabrina. Yeah, so I'm a bag-carrying GP, as they call us, but yeah, also have a PhD in epidemiology and a long interest in air quality issues. So the principle, and I think my brief here today is talk about indoor gas questions. So if you're not heating your house with wood, there's a chance you might be heating it with gas. And that can be done in ways that don't have a health impact, but there's also plenty of gas heaters that do. And this goes to the design of how the heater works. And essentially there's three main ways they can be designed. On the right here is a diagram of a heater which draws cold air in down through a flue. It's burnt in the combustion box here, and all the flue products go up the chimney back outside from the house. So this is actual combustion is sealed off from the room, and if it's working properly and hasn't got any cracks in its ducts and things, this shouldn't release any combustion products to the room. A common kind of heater is ducted, but in fact has a pathway where some of the combustion products can enter the room. And that in normal operation, not much of the combustion products should enter the room, but some do, and they can be a problem for releasing the combustion products into the room. And over here on the left, we have a very common design of gas heater. These are often portable. They plug into a bayonet mount, and all the combustion products from this come out into the room. These kind of heaters may be ones where you can see the flame, so you might see a kind of red or orange panel, and sometimes the flame is fully internal, and what you get out of this is hot air. But those are also a common kind of heater, and they can release combustion products into the room. So the combustion products we worry about with health effects is nitrogen dioxide. This is important because it's a respiratory irritant. The NO2 dissolves in the sort of lung fluid, surface fluid, and creates nitric acid, obviously not something you like to have in your lungs. It both causes asthma and it's also an allergic sensitizer. So it will increase the number of people with allergies to other things if there's NO2 in their environment. The nitrogen oxides are created in the highest temperature part of a flame. So if you're seeing a bright blue flame, that's a high temperature flame, and it's more likely to be making NO2 than a lower temperature flame that would have more an orange or yellow colour to it. The other combustion product we worry about is carbon monoxide. So this is released when there's only partial combustion of hydrocarbons from the gas. It tends to happen more at lower temperatures, and it's a problem because the carbon monoxide binds to the hemoglobin in the bloodstream and stops it from carrying oxygen. So people with carbon monoxide, so the carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin much more strongly than oxygen does. So it just sits on there and stays there. So people affected by carbon monoxide poisoning, they're essentially not getting oxygen delivery to their tissues, and that can be fatal if it's at a serious level. Other minor combustion products, there's a bit of formaldehyde released and a tiny trace of benzene. Comes from sort of incomplete combustion of the hydrocarbons. Formaldehyde is a respiratory irritant and has some issues where it's thought to be carcinogenic, and benzene is a nasty carcinogen, but thankfully it's only present in very, very small amounts. So yeah, it's the NO2 and the carbon monoxide that we mostly worry about. And there's various respiratory problems attributable to these exposures, and I guess the most well-studied and common one is asthma. There's looking at, now, for winter exposures, both people will be running their space heaters during winter, so obviously increases their combustion product exposures. But they're also likely to shut up all the windows and doors and not ventilate the house so well, which will increase their exposure to the things coming out from their gas cooking stove. So winter, yeah, that's more of a problem in winter than in summer, when people are more likely to have their windows open. So the relative risk for having asthma for children who live in a house where there's a gas stove is 1.42, so a substantial increase. Now, there's no RCT evidence about gas stoves, but there is RCT evidence about gas heaters, and this comes from work done by Guy Marks. Probably people in the audience might have heard of this work already. It was a very large effort. They did this in primary schools in New South Wales, in the Blue Mountains and Goulburn areas, places where it gets cold in winter. They took a group of classrooms, I think there were 22 classrooms in all. They installed 2 heaters in each classroom and then closed them in a big sort of box so that you couldn't tell which heater was working. And the teacher was given a remote to drive the heater with, but week by week, it was either a fully flued heater or an unflued heater that was working during that week. Then they monitored what happened with the children, doing lung function testing and symptom scores, and they could show that during the weeks when it was an unflued heater, there were more symptoms in the children than in the weeks when it was the fluid heater. They couldn't show a difference in FEV1, so that the lung function testing didn't make a difference, but there was more symptoms on the unfluid weeks. The other thing about asthma is that in general practice, doctors who are aware of this are now asking questions about gas exposure as part of the standard asthma consultation. So seeing a person with asthma, doctors should be asking about what their indoor air is like, including the use of gas appliances. So in the trial that Marks did in the primary schools, the heaters they were comparing were like this one down on the bottom right of the screen. This is a low NOx heater made by an Australian company called Bowen. That's the kind of, the best that heaters get to. The one that's the larger photo here is the old style gas heaters that have been in classrooms for many years. When I was giving talk a bit like this to a group of local government councillors, some of whom had been teachers, they were all saying, yes, these are still quite prevalent in New South Wales schools. Apparently every other state in the country has got rid of their gas heaters out of schools, but not New South Wales. New South Wales has a gradual plan of replacing them as the schools get air conditioners. But that's a slow process, and there's a lot of these heaters still in use. And they're not the low NOx ones used in the research. There's these old-fashioned ones that produce much higher amounts of combustion products. The other health effect we worry about is the carbon monoxide poisoning. And of course, it's a cumulative kind of process. Carbon monoxide slowly attaches onto the hemoglobin, and so how toxic it is depends on how long you're exposed for. At low concentrations, you might get headache and dizziness after 6 hours. And as the concentrations go up, you get symptoms more quickly, and more severe symptoms, including convulsions and being unconscious, and people dying in less than 2 hours if you get up to these really high levels. So that is an important problem. The clinical picture, if someone's arriving at hospital with carbon monoxide poisoning at low levels, the symptoms are quite hard to distinguish from other things that you might be experiencing in winter, like having the flu, headaches and dizziness. One of the clues is that these are location-specific symptoms, so it happens in a certain building but not in other buildings. More severe poisoning, the patient is characteristically unconscious and pink. So someone who's asphyxiated usually goes a nasty kind of blue colour. These people are pink because their hemoglobin is all saturated. It's just saturated with something that's no use. People who have carbon monoxide poisoning, non-fatal, but serious carbon monoxide poisoning, often have ongoing neuropsychiatric problems, so memory problems or cognitive problems after they've recovered. So that can be a serious problem even for people who survive it. There was the only study we quote on this from 10 years ago from an emergency department. They screened people with headache and found that 6.4% of them had elevated carbon monoxide levels. So it was only, it was the mild end of the spectrum of poisoning, but it was commoner than had previously been thought. That study was done in Turkey, so it's hard to know if that's relevant to Australia. I couldn't find any Australian data on carbon monoxide poisoning. From the UK, it seemed like there was a fair number of hospitalisations in a year, much more common in winter. The sources of the carbon monoxide were often people using kind of informal forms of heating. So they might be, living on a boat or in a caravan or in a tent, and sometimes bringing heaters made for outdoor use into an indoor place. Other carbon monoxide sources were vehicles and pumps and generators. But look, it still happens that people are seriously affected by carbon monoxide. This is the news headline from a couple of years ago, where there was a near miss in Sydney when I think there were 3 people badly affected by carbon monoxide, and somebody luckily noticed and got them out of there. So no one died in that event. There was an event, I think about 10 years ago in Victoria, when 2 brothers died from a faulty heater. The heater in question in this one was one of these. I was a bit shocked to see that. I used to have one of those, but luckily mine kept working properly since I got rid of it. But you can still buy these things. So this week in Bunnings, cost $69. This is a little heater. The fine print says it's for outdoor use only. Runs off these little butane cylinders. But you can imagine lots of situations where people, if they're struggling to live in a house or a caravan or a tent that's much too cold, would be tempted to bring one of these indoors, and that's when the risk occurs. Rinnai is still selling these heaters. This is a Rinnai ad. There you have the heater flaming away in the corner. It all looks very cosy, but that room would have substantial levels of nitrogen oxides in it. If the heater's working properly, they shouldn't be making carbon monoxide, but it happens if they're not serviced properly, or if something's blocking their air ducts, you get the carbon monoxide problems. So how the health risks from these gas heaters often depends on issues with the building they're in. So when it's cold, people, close up their buildings better to keep the warmth in. There's an issue if you run an exhaust fan, such as in the kitchen or in a bathroom, that creates a negative pressure within the building and makes it more likely that if it's this kind of heater, you get exhaust combustion products drawn from the heater into the room. So if you're doing testing, it's now mandatory in Victoria for places with a gas heater to have testing looking for carbon monoxide. And when they do that testing, they'll turn on the exhaust fans and see if with all the exhaust fans in the building running, whether that creates a problem with detectable levels of carbon monoxide. Other things that go wrong with heaters is getting the air inlets blocked by, dust or toys or balloons or anything that can get in there. And of course, heaters, when they're new and installed, hopefully don't have any cracks or leaks in them. But over time, even the ones that are supposed to be room sealed may well develop leaks. There's change in now. I think this is all regulated state by state, so it's different. And the audience, the webinar might be across all the states of Australia. In Victoria, the regulations changed in 22, banning the sale of models that don't have some safety features. Particularly, they have to have a fan-forced airflow system and a way of detecting if some of the combustion products spill out into the room, and then they cut off if that's detected. When they cut off, you can't just sort of reset it and start it up again. You have to call a serviceman with a special gadget, allowing them to reset it. So that's supposed to trigger the heater getting serviced if that ever happens. So that's the only restriction I could find out about of, whether these things are still really for sale. Of course, from last year, Victoria has banned new dwellings having gas connections. So gradually over time, the number of people with domestic gas connections will decrease. This is the projection from the Australian Energy Market Operator for 2025 about how many houses and commercial businesses in the country will have a gas connection. So 5 million currently, and they expect this to decline steadily over the coming decades as people switch away from using gas in their homes. In New South Wales, Doctors for the Environment Australia has been involved in a campaign that I've been part of. The state government hasn't made any steps towards banning new gas connections, as has been done in the ACT in Victoria, but some local government areas have taken that step. So there's a list of LGAs there: Lane Cove, Waverley, Parramatta, Newcastle, Hornsby, and as of a couple of weeks ago, Sydney Council have brought in development control plans that don't allow new gas connections to dwellings. This is based on some legal advice. In New South Wales, a council is not allowed to do anything on the basis of climate arguments because that's regulated at the state level. But for health reasons or for economic benefits, a council is allowed to make these changes. So it's gradually coming in across various councils, but it would make much more sense if that gas connection ban was done at the state level. From the household perspective, the transition away from using gas makes sense because all the old uses of gas have a better electric alternative. So for heating, reverse cycle air conditioning is better. For cooking, induction is better. For hot water, direct solar heat pumps are better. So there's no convincing argument to use gas in a residential setting anymore. Now, of course, this leaves the situation where as people leave the reticulated network, there's less customers and a smaller customer base to collect fees from for running the network, and it will enter a death spiral. So less customers means standing costs are divided over a smaller customer base and the prices will go up. So that's a problem that needs to be grappled with. Certainly the street where I live, out of about 20 houses, about half a dozen of them have turned off their gas connections. So the remaining houses are having to pay for the network, and eventually the network operators won't think that that's worth doing. There's a bit of argy-bargy in this area. You hear the gas companies talking about renewable gas as if they're going to substitute biomethane or hydrogen into the existing network. That's rubbish. Hydrogen just doesn't travel in those pipes properly. The appliances are not compatible with hydrogen. There's never going to be a hydrogen distribution network keeping the gas industry going. The amount of biomethane could be substituted in, but there's not a credible source for that much biomethane. So it can be used in some niche situations, but there's no feasible way to produce enough biomethane to substitute out fossil gas that's currently in the network. There's an interesting question of who owns the networks. For New South Wales, it's a company called Jemena. Jemena is 50% owned by the Singapore government and 50% owned by the Chinese government. So if the network closes down, it's not going to burn any Australian investors. It's all foreign governments that have bought these assets. So the actions that I'd like to see happening is some public education about indoor gas health risks. And this could be done at the point of sale of appliances. You know, people are buying gas stoves and gas heaters without understanding that these things do have a health impact for their families. There should be some public education about minimising exposure from gas appliances still in use. So, you know, if you're using a gas stove, and often, you know, people are using these things without any choice in the matter, they should be turning on an extractor fan or opening a window to try to get those gases out of their kitchen. There's a strong argument for removing gas appliances from public housing, especially people in public housing don't have any choice about which appliances they'll be using. We think stopping allowing gas connections of new dwellings is a bit of a no-brainer. Substituting, you know, trying to make an apartment block all electric after it's been built is very expensive and difficult. So it just makes more sense that these things shouldn't be connected to gas in the first place. And the way the gas network is funded has kind of been built on the idea that it would be ever expanding, that there's going to be new pipes being put in, and the cost of those new pipes is often amortized over a very long operating life. And the economics are going to be quite different when in fact it's a shrinking network rather than a growing network. And I'd like to see the medical workforce having a better understanding of these indoor air questions, and particularly that issue of, you know, what gets talked about during a consultation with them. So that's the end of what I've prepared to talk about, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that interesting talk on residential gas heating and health. Now we'll open the floor for any questions that the attendees may have. There are already a few questions in the Q&A. I guess the first one, we'll go to Amanda. There's a question from Murray, and they're saying that the ACT Environment Commissioner's report on wood heater policy found that education programs and wood heater replacement programs have not improved air quality. However, the suggested approaches that you presented likely to be any different.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a challenge, definitely. Part of the wood smoke workshop that we hosted included representation from New Zealand, and so those colleagues were able to sort of demonstrate that it really needs to be a very holistic approach, that it, you know, we don't just focus on web-based, you know, instructions, because they're just not that effective. But I think, you know, we need to really think about changing. If people are going to insist on using wood heaters, we have to change their efficiency, and the standards need to reflect a better way of using those. And I think that so a more comprehensive, I think, approach to that is needed, not just the one approach at a time. And so I know they haven't been particularly successful in Australia, but I think it's maybe not been as well funded or supported as the New Zealand context. So we're hopeful, if that helps.
Amanda, and on that note, like I'm interested in the Making the Switch campaign. So I saw that the researchers are planning to do interviews with the participants. So what does the interview entail? Like, is it about like their health, or more about feasibility and acceptability?
I think it's more around acceptability and feasibility. I think that the concept for the project was to really find a methodology that could be applied by different councils across the country. And there's a rebate system, or, you know, what's the most effective way of getting people engaged. So it's really more about that process. So I think that that's something that we needed to really understand, to then be able to go back to the stakeholders and the funders, and just sort of explain this is what you need to consider if you want to go into a neighbourhood or a particularly poor air quality area. So that's kind of the sort of function of the project.
Yeah. Thanks, Amanda. Ben, there's a question about gas heaters. And is the problem with gas heaters of a similar nature to wood heaters, in that the standard that allows for unflued gas heaters isn't fit for purpose? If so, what can be done to clean up the standard setting procedures so that this doesn't happen in the future, and to ensure all non-fit for purpose standards are cancelled as soon as practicable?
Look, I think the standard for gas heaters allows some fairly high NOx heaters still to be sold. So the Bowen ones that market themselves as low NOx are well below the level of the other kinds of heaters, but even so, they're releasing combustion products at levels that have health effects. So I don't think the problem will be eliminated by some tighter standards. I think the problem will be eliminated by just not using gas heaters.
Thanks, Ben. And Dorothy's asking, are questions about wood smoke exposure also part of the asthma consultation?
Yeah, look, there's a whole lot of things to talk about in that consultation. You know, dust mites and pets, and what the floor coverings are, and what you wear while you do the vacuum cleaning, in terms of respiratory protection. But yeah, if people are exposed to wood smoke, there's, yeah, so wood smoke is part of that consultation as well.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like, how often do you see patients with health issues due to residential gas heating?
Well, we see people with asthma every day. So that those questions come up. And when you start asking about it, yeah, look, often parents of children with asthma are very keen to get rid of their gas stove once they know it's a problem. And I guess it depends on the demographics of the practice. But yeah, where I work, there's a surprising number of parents who say, oh yeah, we're coming up to a kitchen renovation. We'll get rid of the gas stove, you know, next time it's possible. There are plenty of things people can do to reduce their indoor gas exposure without replacing their kitchen stove or their heater. Yeah, so the simplest thing is opening a window. Now that's not so good if it's really cold and it's the heater you're talking about, but for the cooktop, opening a window does reduce exposure quite a lot. Having a range hood that's ducted out the building does help, although there are lots of range hoods that just blow straight back into the kitchen, don't help. And then an option, a fairly cheap and easy option for the stove, is just getting a single pot induction gadget, which you can buy from Kmart for less than $100. And that eliminates all those occasions when you just need to heat one pot. Little induction gadget, which just plugs into a power point. It's not a difficult thing to install.
Thanks, Ben. So there's a question from Kit. I guess Amanda and or Ben could answer this question. So she's asking whether councils could legally ban wood stoves and fireplaces indoors and outdoors in new developments, as is possible in New South Wales for gas in all states.
I think I'm not across this, but I think some places have. But I think some places have tried and failed. So I think it's not a consistent option. I'm not, but I don't know fully.
My impression is that the states would have that power if they wanted to, but they're reluctant to take it on because there's a lot of people with wood heaters, and it would be politically difficult.
Thanks, Ben and Amanda. So there's a question from Verinda. They've said that all heaters are also available from Bunnings. Do you know if it's safe, Ben?
I'm not sure what's meant by an oil heater. Some heaters are an electric heater that uses circulating oil to distribute the heat through the fins of the heater. And in that situation, the oil is just a heat transfer liquid within the heater, and they're perfectly safe. The oil's not being burnt. The oil just shifts the heat around, and it's an electric heater. I'm not aware of anyone burning oil as a heat source indoors.
Thanks, Ben. Amanda, there's a question for you. With people and communities having a lot of nostalgia with wood heaters, not so much gas, has there been any qualitative analysis undertaken to understand the options for changing behaviors? Will the needle move to reduce uses of wood heater or move to using efficiencies to address outdoor air quality?
Yes, I think that was some of the work that we was conducted through the Mount Barker focus groups. I think there was a lot of questions and different ways of asking, to people how people think about wood heaters and the emissions that come from them. And I think a lot of people were just not aware that there was a health problem related to them. And so I think there's still a lot of education that needs to be done. But yeah, I think that the cozy factor that you don't get from a reverse cycle air condition. I mean, I think we wanted to try and understand that the heating of the home through the change out process in Armidale, just so that we could explain that there's no difference in how warm your home is based on the different types of heating that are available, and this the reverse cycle air conditioner will potentially be better for the health of everybody and the environment as well.
Thanks, Amanda. Ben, there's a question from Michael Abramson. So Michael said that when Guy's study of advented heaters in schools was published, the then minister said that all gas heaters would be replaced. She was then overruled by the premier, which is why the unsatisfactory situation persists. I also heard that the New South Wales electricity network did not have capacity to heat all schools. What can be done to promote the transition to electric heating and cooling?
Yeah, look, there's some interesting history there. That promise was made and then not followed through. I think the advent of there's been technological improvement in the way air conditioners are built, that they do a better job of heating. That a reverse cycle air conditioner can deliver, I think it's 3 times as much heat into the room as it uses in electricity. So those big efficiency gains make the heating with reverse cycle air conditioning much more efficient than it used to be. It seems to break the first laws of thermodynamics, but somehow they got around it. So there's, I think that the state government policy in New South Wales is now to replace gas heaters with reverse cycle air conditioners as those are slowly rolled out across the state. And I think that's starting in the places with the hottest summers and the coldest winters. So it's sort of progressively happening, but I think it's not a priority and it's only happening at a slow rate. So, yeah, look, I think that the government would probably be susceptible to groups of parents kicking up a fuss if their kids are still exposed to gas heaters in their school. But at the moment, I don't think the government is feeling much pressure about it.
Thanks, Ben. And there's a question from Nathaniel. What advice do you have for environmental health practitioners dealing with residents with concerns about wood smoke from neighbors that cannot be brought for further enforcement under nuisance provisions of public health legislation? Many people access education resources and learn of the dangers, but councils are quite limited in actions that can be taken.
Yeah, I think that's where we're lacking teeth, I think, in terms of regulations. And so, hopefully, with this concerted effort, we can push to get some changes made. And I think, local councils are the ones that have to deal with the problem, because they get the complaints and they have to enforce things, and they just don't have the people to, the capacity to take on those challenges. So I think there's a lot that has to change and needs to change. So I understand the dilemma.
Thanks, Amanda. So there's 3 minutes left until the end of the webinar, so this will be the last question. I guess Amanda and or Ben could answer this question. From yours and others' research, how important is energy or housing insecurity as drivers for use of wood heater or gas heater stove use, especially in regional and rural areas? There's likely an intersection of health determinants, making it very difficult for many households with some of the poorest health to achieve in-household benefits of shifting to alternative resources.
Or maybe let Ben.
Yeah, look, it's true that a lot of people don't have much choice about how they heat their home or what they cook on in the kitchen. Certainly in social housing, housing that's owned by the government, they could take those steps and become better landlords. But in the private rental sector, there's not really any big stick can be used to change heating arrangements that's currently available. I know in Victoria, the rules for landlords changed so that they had to get gas heating inspected every 2 years. And that's a fairly expensive process. So it shifts the economics in favour of getting rid of the gas heater instead of paying for it to be inspected every 2 years. But yeah, look, I think people who have few choices or are homeless or living in informal kind of housing, there's big problem of how to stay warm and comfortable, and that's where people are doing dangerous things, bringing outdoor heaters indoors and exposing themselves to carbon monoxide risks. So I agree that there is a sort of an equity argument that people with the least options are often exposed to the greatest health risks.
Thanks, Ben. So as we conclude today's webinar, I want to extend my sincere appreciation to Amanda and Ben for their excellent presentations on this topic. We hope that attendees have found the information valuable and insightful. I'm sorry we did not manage to get through all the questions, but we'll pass them on to the speakers and be in touch with you soon. If you have any further questions or would like additional resources, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Centre for Safe Air, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, and goodbye.